So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Disaster Legal Services CLE. My name is Ida Chavez de Oseguera. I am the Interim Program Coordinator for Arkansas Access to Justice. And today I'll be your moderator. I would like to start the CLE by acknowledging our co-sponsors from the Legal Response Team, FEMA, the American Bar Association, Young Lawyers Division, the Arkansas Bar Association, Legal Aid of Arkansas, and the Center for Arkansas Legal Services. We're delighted to have folks attending in person at the Arkansas Bar Association and online via Zoom. I would like to begin the CLE with a few housekeeping items. For attorneys seeking to receive CLE credit for their in-person or online attendance, please note that you can only receive credit for attending the full hour. I'll be emailing the certificate of attendance to those who complete the full hour at the end of the CLE if you're attending online. Once you receive it, please fill it out and send it back to me by no later than May 5th at 5 p.m. Also, if during the CLE you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll receive paper questions for those who are here attending in person at the Arkansas Bar Association. And we'll reserve 5 minutes at the end of the presentation to make those questions. And lastly, at the end of the CLE, once the session concludes, you'll receive a survey in a new tab. Please fill that out. It'll help us improve with your comments. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter, Attorney Jason Auer. Jason is the Fair Housing Director of Legal Aid of Arkansas. He has been a legal aid attorney for more than a decade. During this time, Jason has focused on litigation involving subsidized housing, eviction defense, foreclosure defense, and housing discrimination. In his current position, Jason leads the only private fair housing program in the state of Arkansas. Jason served as a member of the American Bar Association's Disaster Legal Services team. In that role, he helped coordinate the legal response to federally declared disasters. Jason is a graduate of the University of Arkansas School of Law. Jason, thank you so much for being here, and the microphone is all yours.
All right, thank you. All right, are we good now? All right, thank you for that, Edith. My name is Jason Auer. I am a staff attorney at Legal Aid of Arkansas, and I run our fair housing program. Before I was really as involved with our fair housing program, I was on the disaster legal services team with the ABA's Young Lawyers division. And as part of that, I actually did some work on national disasters around the country. Specifically, I helped coordinate the response to Hurricane Harvey in Houston and Tropical Storm Gita in American Samoa. So the goal of today's presentation, and I'm trying to figure out where to look here because I've never done a presentation that's both live and on Zoom, so bear with me a little bit if I don't seem like I'm looking at you. The goal of today's presentation is really to give you as private bar attorneys an opportunity to learn how you can volunteer or contribute to the recovery efforts from the tornadoes that we had here on March 31st. So it's not going to be as much a deep dive into FEMA law or the FEMA appeals process or any of the other real legal issues that come up during a disaster, although we are going to touch on those things a little bit. The idea here is just to kind of give a real bird's eye view of what's going on and let you decide, maybe how you can help, help the coordination that's going on with the ABA and with the legal services organizations in the state, and just try to give you a better idea how all of that works. Before we really get started, I did want to mention that Legal Aid of Arkansas is doing a disaster relief clinic at the Odell McCollum Community Center in Wynne, Arkansas on June 2nd. So that is coming up, and we are looking for volunteers to help that. So if you want to go help our friends out in Wynne, that would be appreciated. If you are here at the Arkansas Bar Center, we have a volunteer sign-up sheet over on the food table, and that you're able to select kind of what your level of involvement, what you want your level of involvement to be. If you are not, then we're going to put some information in the chat about how you can get in contact with Legal Aid of Arkansas or the Arkansas Access to Justice Commission to volunteer if you would like to. So with that, I'll get started on the substantive material here. If you have questions, please do put them in the chat, and hopefully Edith will answer those or get those answered for you. Right. All right. So we'll start out with just a little bit about what FEMA is. So FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is the federal agency that coordinates disaster response in the United States. And, it really is kind of both a coordination type organization and a direct services organization. So it does both of those functions. It coordinates between state and local partners, makes sure that everyone is on the same page, so that disaster relief is happens as efficiently as possible. And then it also provides a ton of direct services. And we'll talk about all those in a minute, but that's everything from actually being boots on the ground and helping survivors, by tarping roofs and handing out water and that type of thing, to providing a lot of financial and other types of assistance to survivors as well through an application process that we'll talk about here in a minute. FEMA's Enabling Act is the Stafford Act. That authorizes the president to provide assistance essentially when there is a major disaster declared in a state, territory, or tribal area. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but in relation to our tornadoes here, there has been a major disaster declared. FEMA, importantly, with what we're talking about today, has the authority to provide free legal services to low-income survivors of major disasters. That is authorized by statute. That is where we get our disaster legal services program that we're talking about today. FEMA is broken down into regions. We're in Region 6. So that headquarters there is in Denton, Texas for the FEMA response for Region 6. FEMA's mission is to support our citizens and first responders to ensure that as a nation, we work together to build, sustain, and improve our capability to prepare for, protect against, and respond to, and recover from, and mitigate all hazards. All right. So like I said, FEMA does a lot of different things. It, primarily does coordination. So when you have a disaster, there are a lot of different organizations that come together to support disaster response, and FEMA kind of leads up that effort. So it's coordinating between people like first responders, the state, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which is a way for states to pull in resources from nearby states, and then also the federal government. So all disasters take place firstly at a local level, right? And then it kind of expands out from there, pulling in assistance from regional partners and the federal government to deal with the disaster. We had our disaster declared here for our tornadoes. The incident period, as it's called, or the day the tornado hit, was March 31st, 2023. The disaster declaration actually came in a few days later on April 2nd. DR 4698, that's our disaster case number for our FEMA number assigned to this disaster. And the counties that were most impacted and approved for FEMA assistance were Cross, Lone Oak, and Pulaski counties. There's FEMA's map showing the affected areas. You will notice that Cross, Lone Oak, and Pulaski counties were approved for both public assistance and individual assistance. And I'll talk about what those things mean in a minute, but that's basically the level of support that FEMA is providing during this disaster. And then we've got a couple disaster pictures. I'm sure if you guys are here in Little Rock, there's no way to hide what's happened to our community. And so I'm sure you've seen way more of this than you would care to, but for our friends around the state, it was a bad tornado. All right. So some things to kind of keep in mind to manage expectations. So here's some kind of, I guess, misconceptions about disaster relief in general. The first is I don't need to prepare. That's the government's job. It's a little bit late now for our community, but the more preparation you can do on the front end, pre-disaster, during blue sky times, as they call it, the better the response will be. There is an organization in Arkansas called the VOAD, which is actually kind of a collection of volunteer organizations that plan for disasters. And they meet every quarter during normal time. So it's really a good idea to be involved with them to, kind of discuss how disaster response should go in our community. And then when we have a disaster, they're one of the big state type agencies, even though they're not an agency, they're a collection of organizations, but they definitely help with coordinating disaster response in Arkansas. Another common misconception is that FEMA will make you whole if you have property that is damaged by a disaster. That's not true. That's not FEMA's mission or goal at all. FEMA really focuses on getting you in a safe, sanitary place, not to necessarily restore you to the place you were prior to the disaster. So that's kind of a common misconception that people have, that if they're impacted by the disaster, FEMA will just take care of it, and that's not true. They're really providing emergency level services. And also, people are confused why they might need to apply for a loan to have some of their disaster needs met. We'll talk about that in a minute, but for some FEMA services, it is necessary to apply for an SBA loan. And then, what FEMA will do for you depends on whether you are approved or denied for that loan. Talk about that in just a second. Structure of FEMA assistance. All right, so when there is a major disaster declaration like we had here on April 2nd, that allows for FEMA to provide for different types of assistance. And so the way the disaster declaration process works is, once again, it starts at a local level and it kind of funnels its way out, or that's not what a funnel is, but it does this, spreads out. And so what ends up happening is the state of Arkansas, through the governor's office, makes a request with FEMA for a major disaster declaration. And then, FEMA at that point will inspect the damage and end up making a recommendation to the president. And it's ultimately the president of the United States who decides whether there's going to be a major disaster declaration and what levels of assistance are going to be provided. There are three main levels of assistance. The first is public assistance, is assistance provided to state and local governments and kind of big nonprofit organizations that do disaster recovery work. And that's, to kind of clean up the community as a whole, fix roads, fix infrastructure, that type of thing. There's a hazard mitigation grant program that we're not really going to touch on today. But then there's the individual assistance program, which is what we are going to touch on, because that's what most likely you as attorneys are going to be interacting with the community, providing assistance on. Under that individual assistance program, there are several other programs or grants that can be triggered. Not all of these are triggered for every disaster. So you really have to look and see which of these programs are active. It's up to FEMA which programs are going to be active. The governor can ask for specific programs to be activated, but it is ultimately up to the federal government which of these services they're going to provide. So you see some examples there: the Transitional Sheltering and Assistance Program, Disaster Legal Services. which we're going to be talking about today. I will tell you that for the Arkansas Disaster Legal Services is active right now. Individual and households program, other needs assistance, housing assistance. Those are kind of two of the big programs that provide money for disaster survivors, and then the SBA loan program. All right, who's eligible for FEMA benefits? Firstly, you have to be either a U.S. citizen, a non-citizen national, or a qualified alien to be eligible for individual assistance. And so there are some gaps there. If someone is undocumented, they're not going to be eligible for these programs. However, if they have, say, a child in the home who is a U.S. citizen, then that child can actually be the main person that applies for FEMA benefits, and that is okay with FEMA, even though, you know, maybe the head of household is not going to qualify for that assistance. If someone in the household does, then the household does. Importantly, so there are a lot of people from the Marshall Islands in Arkansas, specifically in Northwest Arkansas, but there are more and more individuals from the Marshall Islands throughout the state, and they are here, most of them anyways, based on a treaty. That treaty, unfortunately, does not qualify for individual assistance, so there could potentially be a gap in services there. Next qualification is that the primary place of residence has to be located within the defined disaster zone, and it has to have been affected by the disaster. Individuals must be able to prove that they have suffered a loss that was directly caused by the disaster. That one actually does come up sometimes. You know, if someone was living in a house and the house had some kind of severe issues with it beforehand, and there's a FEMA inspection, and you know, the FEMA inspector can't really tell what's been caused by the disaster and what was maybe damaged or not up to standards before the disaster. That can be a basis for denial of FEMA benefits in some cases. And the individual must prove that the loss cannot be rectified by other means, and it's a loss FEMA can rectify. So FEMA is very big on duplication of benefits. So if you have another way to kind of address the issues that you're having, usually that's going to be through insurance, then FEMA wants you to use your insurance to cover that and not use FEMA benefits. All right, disaster legal services specifically. So this is one of the programs that is activated as part of individual assistance. You know, if the government chooses to activate it, and for our disaster, they have chosen to activate it. So this is the ABA. So it's run by the American Bar Association, so the big bar association's Young Lawyers Division. And it's one of the big public services that the ABA provides. The Young Lawyers Division serves as the exclusive coordinator for legal services for disasters survivors. So how this works is that attorneys from across the country who are members of the ABA are allowed to volunteer for the disaster legal services team. So there's a disaster legal services coordinator who then has a team of attorneys from around the country, and they focus on coordinating disasters, essentially. So when there is a disaster declaration by FEMA and DLS is activated, the ABA's team will assign a lawyer to that disaster to coordinate the response. Typically what they're going to do is get in touch with all the organizations that provide legal services in that community. So that sometimes takes a little bit of time to figure out. Once they do that, they will have a meeting, and then they will set up a hotline for survivors to call with their legal issues. And that has all already happened here in Arkansas. There is a hotline set up that's being run through the Center for Arkansas Legal Services. And so people who have been affected by the tornado are already able to call that hotline and apply for legal services. So There's also weekly coordination calls where you have the disaster legal services coordinator. You have members of all the legal services organizations on there. You're typically going to have the Red Cross on there. You're typically going to have a coordinator with the State Bar Association on there. Chris Hussein with the State Bar Association is the one coordinating that for this disaster, along with Jay Robbins. And you'll have this call and you will be able to, essentially, it's a way to talk to FEMA and let them know about any pressure points that are going on or any problems with the coordination. And then FEMA wants information as well as to what type of legal issues we're seeing so that they can do things on their end to help mitigate some of those problems. Disaster Legal Services is free legal assistance to low-income persons affected by declared major disasters. So the eligibility for the Disaster Legal Services program is simply that the person does not have the means to address the legal issue without DLS intervention. So that is something that is a lot less restrictive than what legal aid or your legal services organization can typically do. We are funded by the Legal Services Corporation, and with that comes some pretty strict restrictions on financial eligibility for our services. With disaster legal services, those those financial restrictions are much less. So that's good. It means we can serve more people, but it means that we have to serve some of those people through volunteer attorneys because of our restrictions. We can't take the cases directly through our traditional legal services programs. All right. Why do survivors need an attorney? So disaster survivors, we see, need food, water, shelter, and an attorney. There are a lot of issues that arise or are worsened by disasters. And, just to name a few, landlord-tenant. When I was coordinating the response to Hurricane Harvey in Houston, for example, that was really the first wave of cases that came in. Hurricane Harvey hit kind of towards the end of the month, if you'll remember. A lot of people were displaced in a very short period of time. They still had rent due. They were worried about, that type of stuff. They're worried about when their apartment gets destroyed, can they go in and get their stuff? Are they still going to be able to live there? Do they still have a lease with their landlord at all, for example? So that was a lot of what we saw. Consumer fraud cases are another big one. So if you have a situation where a lot of property has been damaged, you're going to have a lot of contractors and repair people and that type of thing, price gouging, for example. So consumer fraud's a big one to work through. Insurance. This is a big issue. Any of you private attorneys out there who have some specialized experience with insurance law, that is a very big thing. That's not something legal aid organizations typically deal with. But obviously, it is a big issue when you have a disaster. People not getting the insurance settlements that they thought they should get, people getting denied outright for insurance. So insurance is definitely a big one. Public benefits. This could be as simple as people unable to access their normal public benefits, but then there are some other public benefits that go along with a declared disaster, such as FEMA benefits, disaster unemployment, disaster SNAP, which is a special food stamps program that is run through Arkansas DHS at this point, and that has been activated for this disaster as well. So helping people apply for that. Basically, what that does is it just expands the eligibility for food stamps temporarily to allow individuals affected by the disaster to have money for food. Estates, property, tax issues, and then marginalized communities are especially vulnerable after a disaster. I'm sure that's true in every community. You guys watched the coverage of Hurricane Katrina and saw how that kind of played out in Louisiana, where different communities definitely receive different levels of all kinds of services. All right, so how do you implement DLS? The President of the United States, like I said, makes major disaster declaration. There are other types of declarations that can be made, such as an emergency declaration, but to trigger individual assistance, you have to have a major disaster declaration. Then FEMA, kind of like I said a minute ago, is going to do a needs assessment where they, for the community, look at all the damage and all of that stuff, and then figure out what FEMA programs are going to need to be implemented in that community. It's not automatic that disaster legal services will take place, but it happens pretty often, and it has been activated for Arkansas. FEMA then will send a letter of intent to the Young Lawyers Division with the big bar, and then the Young Lawyers Division will work on that coordination call that I mentioned a minute ago. There'll be a press release that's put out with that hotline number on it, and that hotline will be established to give people a way to access the disaster legal services program. All of that has already happened. Volunteer attorney's role, it's really the same responsibility you have with paying clients. You've got a duty of confidentiality, duty of diligence, competence, and you're expected to provide professional representation. A couple things you can do. Big one is to take cases that take pressure off legal services. So, someone who's worked at legal services for a long time, I can tell you we have areas of kind of expertise that we're good at. We are really good at consumer type cases. We're excellent at landlord tenant type cases. Some wills and estates type work we do pretty well. But there are all these other types of cases that arise after a disaster. Insurance cases, for one, FEMA appeal cases. Those are the two biggest. You're going to have a ton of FEMA appeal issues. You're going to have a ton of insurance issues. So to the extent that private attorneys feel comfortable taking those types of cases, that is going to be a super helpful thing to do. You can also, if you want to be more of a boots on the ground type attorney, you can help by volunteering at a disaster recovery center. Disaster recovery centers are basically a place where that FEMA installs in a community to allow survivors to actually walk in and access benefits. So they can go there and they can do an application for FEMA benefits. They can meet with other community organizations that are providing support. And there's typically someone from Disaster Legal Services there to help them do an intake, help them fill out their FEMA benefits application, that type of thing. So if you want to be on the ground in Little Rock or Wynn, there is an opportunity to do those things as well. All right. I touched on this a minute ago, but this is disaster legal services eligibility. Once again, DLS is open to anyone who has insufficient resources to secure adequate legal services. The Stafford Act tells us to err on the side of inclusion, not exclusion. So we are absolutely, as the DLS team, trying to get as many people access to legal services as we can. It is more relaxed than a lot of legal aid eligibility, although legal aid has a lot of different funding codes as well, funding sources, I should say. They're all coded. Legal aid is also trying to help as many people as possible. Definitely legal aid will assess everyone for eligibility for our program. Some people are not going to meet eligibility, and that's kind of going back to our previous slide here of taking the pressure off legal services. If we have clients or disaster survivors who are not going to meet the eligibility for legal aid, but do meet the eligibility for disaster legal services, that is a gap that private attorneys can help fill. And it's very helpful to the community if they can do that. Fee generating cases are prohibited. So that is similar to legal services corporation funding. So these are cases where basically you would expect to generate an attorney's fee if you prevail in that case. Those types of cases are not appropriate for disaster legal services, although you can certainly volunteer to help anyone pro bono with whatever you want. You know, you shouldn't, not necessarily limited by the DLS program. All right, we talked about these a little bit a second ago. There are a few more here, though. These are just your big post-disaster legal issues. FEMA benefits and appeals, there are going to be a lot of those. We're going to cover those here in just a second. Air property issues, that is something that is a big issue, especially since part of this disaster has kind of touched on East Arkansas and the Delta. You know, when your house gets destroyed, that's a terrible time to actually figure out that you don't own your house outright. You know, maybe it was owned by your grandfather and now it's owned by you and 14 of your closest relatives. So we end up doing a lot of title clearing issues to help people actually be able to access some of these recovery benefits. Lost and destroyed documents is a big one. People, you know, lose their social security card, lose public benefits information, lose wills, that type of thing, and all of that has to be replaced. And then domestic issues, you typically see an uptick in domestic violence whenever there's any type of stressful situation, and certainly being involved in a major disaster would qualify for that. All right, so that's an overview of the Disaster Legal Services Program. That's kind of what we're hoping we can get some of you guys to volunteer for with today's talk. I'm going to talk about some of the other kind of individual assistance programs. These are programs that FEMA provides to help survivors. So I know I talked to you guys, I talked to a few of you before the presentation, and some of you have had family or even your own house impacted by this disaster. So this is going to be good information on just kind of general services that FEMA provides under the individual assistance program. First is called mass care and emergency assistance. So if right after the disaster, you see FEMA out there handing out supplies, helping tarp people's roofs, you know, handing out water, doing kind of like those immediate on-the-ground services, that is through the mass care and emergency assistance program. They also provide what's called critical needs assistance, which is a one-time cash payment. I think the amount is $700. So if someone is in a situation where maybe all their food got destroyed or spoiled, or they need to buy a generator or something like that, that is one of the types of things they can apply to FEMA for, and they get that $700 to take care of those. That is kind of a pot of money that FEMA comes in with, and then once it's gone, it's gone. So if you need critical needs assistance, I would suggest having your clients or yourself, if whatever the case may be, apply for that as early as possible. Crisis counseling and training can be activated. That is where basically FEMA is providing resources to help the community more emotionally heal from the disaster. That can look like group counseling, community networking and support, and other kind of educational type stuff that FEMA will bring in. Disaster unemployment assistance can be activated. That one is for individuals who are not going to be able to work post-disaster. Typically, that's going to be because their job is just not happening at that point. Maybe the building's been destroyed, that type of thing. So for whatever reason, for a period of time, they're not going to be able to work. They can get unemployment assistance through FEMA. Disaster case management is where FEMA actually sends in case managers. Typically, you can access these through the Disaster Recovery Center. These are individuals who are just going to act like case managers for survivors, help them with applying for FEMA benefits is the big thing they help with. But they can also do a lot of other things as well. So those are disaster case managers. If you are representing someone as an attorney and there are disaster case managers activated and they have a disaster case manager, that can be someone who it's helpful for you to work with to make sure the person gets all the benefits that they are entitled to. More individual assistance programs, big one, the individuals and household program. There are two types of major assistance under the IHP. There's housing assistance, which provides some cool things. It can provide rental assistance. So if someone has had their primary residence destroyed and they don't have another place to go, they can't stay with family, they can make an application to FEMA for rental assistance. FEMA is going to then, if they are approved for rental assistance, they will give them 2 months rent. And that is going to be at the fair market rent as determined by HUD, which is not a lot of money. So don't expect to rent someplace really nice with this amount of money. And then that will get basically be up for review with FEMA every 2 months. To see if that is going to get extended, and it will. It's either going to go for 18 months, which is the limit that FEMA kind of has the individuals and households program active for. That'd be the long end of it, or until the person secures housing. So if they secure housing in 4 months, then it's going to cut off at that point. If it has to go out to 18 months, that's going to be something that's going to be reviewed by FEMA every 2 months to see if they still qualify. Lodging expenses, those are if you have to stay in a hotel for a period of time, there's a way to apply for reimbursement for that type of thing. And then home repair and replacement. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. FEMA will provide some money to help repair your home or replace it. The limit on that, though, is $41,000. I don't know how many of you could replace your home for $41,000. And also, like I said, FEMA is really big on duplication of benefits. So it's really only going to be if your insurance company doesn't pay and the settlement that they give you is less than $41,000. So $41,000 is the absolute max. Most of these FEMA benefits that are triggered are going to be much less than that for home repair and replacement insurance or assistance, sorry. So that is housing assistance. The other type of assistance is called other needs assistance. This can be really broken down into two types. There is SBA dependent other needs assistance, which means to access this stuff, you're going to need to have applied for an SBA loan. And then there's SBA non-dependent. Those are things like funeral assistance. So if someone died as a result of the disaster, there's a way to get funeral assistance, medical and dental care, child care. The ones that are dependent are going to be personal property replacement, moving and transportation, and critical needs assistance. So transportation is basically if your car's damaged, and then personal property is your belongings. This is also going to be capped at $41,000. It is a different $41,000 than the housing assistance, so that's good. It's a different pot of money, so you could get some of both. But once again, for the personal property, the moving and storage, and for the transportation, you are going to be typically required to apply for an SBA loan before you will be able to access those. SBA loans, these are long-term, low-interest loans for survivors. They are going to be usually 15 to 30 years, low interest. I think now they are doing the first year is actually interest-free on an SBA loan. And this is kind of really after insurance, the next place you go to get your situation addressed, whether that be, home replacement, you can get up to $200,000 loan to replace or repair your home, and you can get up to $40,000 for your personal property. So that's where FEMA is going to expect you to go next after insurance, is to apply for one of these low interest loans to repair or replace your property. And like I said, some of that, especially with personal property, it is going to depend whether then you can access those FEMA programs. It just depends on whether you have actually applied for an SBA loan or not. So if FEMA tells you to apply for an SBA loan, you need to apply for one, even if you don't think you will qualify for it. Barriers to getting assistance, lack of knowledge. is a big one. People don't know assistance is available. They don't know how to look for assistance. They don't even know they have a legal issue in some cases. They don't know how the system works. They don't have funding. They don't even, they may not have a house. They may not have a stable place to stay. So that's going to really inhibit their ability to go out and look for assistance, may not have transportation, may not have time at that point, may distrust the process. We see that especially a lot with our undocumented community and some other communities. And then, maybe either real or perceived costs associated with getting assistance. All right, so we've talked about FEMA's role in disaster response. We've talked about the process for how a disaster is declared. We've talked a little bit about who's eligible for FEMA, what disaster legal services is, and barriers. Now we're going to cover how you actually apply for FEMA benefits and what happens if you're approved and what happens if you are denied. So applying for assistance. You can apply for assistance in person at a disaster recovery center. There are several of those set up around Little Rock, and there's at least one in Wynn right now. You can go to FEMA's application website, which is disasterassistance.gov, and apply online. That is the easiest way to do it if you are someone or your client is someone who has access to the internet and can kind of maintain access to the internet, because once you apply, then FEMA is going to communicate with you through that portal. And if you have spotty internet access, you may miss something. So in certain situations, it's excellent. But if you're not going to have good access to the internet, it may not be the best course of action for you. You can apply via phone at 800-621-3362. 3362 spells FEMA, in case you were wondering. The deadline to apply is 60 days from the disaster declaration. So disaster declaration for Arkansas was on April 2nd. So we have 60 days, so roughly till the beginning of June, to have people apply for FEMA benefits. And they need to do that. They need to do that whether they have not heard back from their insurance company yet, or whatever the case may be. You need to make sure you get that application for FEMA benefits in within that application period. You can file late applications in some situations, but you have to have a good reason to do that, and FEMA will analyze that on a case-by-case basis. So it's much better just to apply during the 60 days before that deadline is up. It's a picture of a disaster recovery center. All right. Once you apply for assistance, if you have stated on the application that there has been some damage to your home, FEMA is going to complete a home inspection. So they are going to send a home inspector out to see what the damage is. The inspector will do the inspection and report the findings to FEMA. They work on scales essentially from 1 to 5, and we'll just kind of rate all the livability factors of your house to on that scale, turn that information over to FEMA. They're not always super highly trained, especially in huge disasters. FEMA will kind of bring in a lot of people in a hurry, but they're not necessarily someone who has had more than a few hours of training on how to do this. So just keep that in mind when especially dealing with the appeals process for these. Some of them are really good. I don't want to say they're all bad or anything like that, but just be aware there's not a huge training requirement there. You have to submit paperwork to FEMA along with your application. FEMA is going to want to see insurance policy settlement agreements. You definitely want to tell FEMA if you have insurance, even though that's going to make it substantially more likely that your application will get denied on the front end. You do not want to lie on the application. You don't want FEMA giving you money that you are not entitled to, because I will say there's a recoupment process that happens after the disaster. And if FEMA has given you money and then decides later you weren't entitled to that money, they are coming for it. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure you turn in any SBA loan applications because that will trigger your eligibility for some other needs assistance that we talked about a second ago. Government ID, and then proof of primary residency. So that can be a deed. If you don't have a deed, it can be other things as well, even like down to a utility bill. You just need to show FEMA that you are living in this place and it's your primary residence. FEMA's not going to fix any secondary residences or vacation homes or anything like that. They're concentrated on trying to get the most people safe that they can. All right. If you're approved, FEMA will automatically transfer funds into your bank account. And like I said, max benefit there is $41,000. Most FEMA awards are going to be significantly less than that. A lot of them are less than $10,000. If you are denied, you will get a written letter stating the basis of the denial. And once you get that letter stating the basis of the denial, you've got 60 days from the time you get that letter to appeal. How do you appeal? An appeal is basically just a letter that you send to FEMA. So when we talk about doing FEMA appeals, this is one big thing attorneys can help with are these appeals. Every appeal is going to include full name, FEMA registration number, the disaster number, pre-disaster address, phone number, and then a clear and complete basis for the appeal. It does not have to be long. It's not like writing an appeal to the Court of Appeals. I did appeals for Tropical Storm Gita in American Samoa. I mean, they're letters. That's all they are. Just explaining the basis for the appeal. So it's going to be pretty succinct. You do need to include supporting documentation for the appeal, and that's going to be driven by why, it'll say in the denial letter why it was denied. If it's denied because you have insurance, then you want to, provide supporting documentation showing that the insurance did not cover the whole loss that you had, for example. And then you put a signature under penalty of perjury. It is a self notarizing document. So essentially kind of like you're signing an affidavit. All right, after the appeal, FEMA will either reverse its denial, sustain its denial, or ask for more information. If they're asking for more information, they will send you a letter asking for that information within 30 days. They may contact a third party. If you have some estimates or whatever, they could contact that person. And they may do a subsequent inspection if you allege that there is something deficient in their inspection. And they have to inform you of the appeal decision within 90 days or the appeal is deemed denied. All right, so here are some kind of tips and tricks as we get towards the end of our presentation here, last few minutes. Some things you can do to prepare yourself for this type of situation. Know how FEMA and DLS implementation will happen in your community. Know where the shelters are, the DRCs are. We've got that information if you don't know. And the available services and the different legal services providers who will be providing disaster legal services. Plan for contingencies and know the deadlines. These deadlines are not long, 60 days from the initial declaration to apply for FEMA benefits. And then if you get denied, 60 days to appeal. Those are not tremendously long deadlines. All right. Understand FEMA's role. That's very important. The big thing there is understand that FEMA's responsibility is not to make you or the community whole. It is to get people in a safe and sanitary spot and basically give them critical services that they need, whether that's emergency services like we were talking about before, critical needs type things. So be aware of what FEMA's role is. Not always, it's not going to be to make you whole, to fix your house as nice as it was before the disaster happened. That's not their role. It is a bureaucratic system. It is the government. So as such, it can be a little slow and frustrating to work with. So know that going in and be able to advise your clients of that. Some other things you can do, keep up with documentation. you're going to have written documentation, and you're going to want to make notes of kind of who you're talking to, get contact information, write down the questions they ask, write down what you told them, because all of that can be useful definitely during the appeal process. You want photographic evidence, especially if you are going to be filing an appeal. So there are all kinds of restrictions on what the FEMA inspector can actually look at. They're not going to go into the basement. They're not going to go onto the roof. For example, if, and if you've got issues with those areas, you want to be able to advise your clients to generate their own evidence on that a little bit. And that's going to be carefully documenting things. Pictures and videos are all very helpful. FEMA inspectors, like I said, it requires only a criminal background check. There's not really any specialized experience in construction that is required to do that job. And they are going to be the ones deciding eligibility. Proof of ownership, also very important. The inspector has the option basically to deny your FEMA benefits if you can't show that you own the property. So you want to make sure, and that's where the clearing up title and heirs property stuff can get complicated. So that can be the basis for a denial. So you want to make sure that you are putting all the evidence together for your client to show that they own the property, so that they can fully access these benefits. And then you also want to know a little bit about just kind of property law in your jurisdiction, know how deeds are recorded. And, that stuff can be important for SBA loans as well. Insurance coverage. The application is going to ask you whether you have homeowners insurance or not. And, not just homeowners insurance. If you have renters insurance, you're going to need to tell them about that. If you have car insurance and you're claiming your vehicle has been damaged, you need to tell them about that. If you do tell them that you have homeowners insurance, that's usually going to lead to a pretty quick denial of benefits. Like I said, though, you do not want to lie to FEMA about whether you have insurance or not. They will find out. And if they issue money that they feel later that they should not have issued, then there is a recoupment process. If you have insurance and you're still dealing with the insurance company, you want to make a FEMA claim anyway, because, your insurance claim could end up getting denied, or it could end up not paying for all the damage that occurred. And so at that point, you may be able to fall back on SBA or FEMA to cover some of that damage that the insurance company did not take care of for you. All right, so this is straight out of the FEMA Individual Assistance Guidebook. So this just kind of shows you how it works. If an applicant's FEMA inspection recorded $900 in real property damage and $25 in personal property damage, and the applicant's insurance settlement totaled $870 for the real property, which left an unmet need of $25 in real property and $25 in personal property. In this scenario, applicant is eligible for an IHP award of $50, which is the combined total for home repair assistance and personal property assistance. So they're only going to pick up what the insurance company is not picking up. And that's only going to be if the total amount you got from the insurance company is less than $41,000. Because if it's more than $41,000, then FEMA is going to say, well, you've already been essentially given the full benefit we could possibly give you by your insurance company, so we're not going to pay for anything over that. But if you have, less than that amount, and but your insurance company covers even less than that, then you may be entitled to some FEMA benefit there. SBA loans, typically you wouldn't want to apply for loans that you can't afford, but it is necessary in the SBA context. Importantly, you don't have to take the loan if you apply for it. So a lot of times you're in a situation where your client needs to apply for it because FEMA's told them to later be able to access the FEMA, some of the other needs assistance. If they get it, or if they don't get it, then they'll be able to access those programs, the moving and storage program, the personal property replacement program, and the transportation program to replace their transportation. But if they if they are denied the loan, then they may become eligible for those grants. If they get the loan, then they have to decide whether they want to take it or not. If it's not going to be something they can afford, then they don't want to take it, but they will need to realize at that point that they're not getting any of those other grants from FEMA at that point either for those other needs assistance programs. All right, appeals, exercise your right to appeal. Don't give up. System is complicated and bureaucratic. I will say with FEMA appeals, in my experience, if you address the issue that's in the denial letter and you provide FEMA some documentation, you've got a pretty good success rate of getting people additional benefits. So this is one thing you can do for people that is going to typically lead to at least a better outcome, if not a good outcome. I know when we were handling appeals for Tropical Storm Gita, Legal Aid of Arkansas took several appeals and had success on all of them, I think, getting someone at least some more benefits than they were going to get. All right. And once again, you're going to want to coordinate with a disaster case manager. If your client has a disaster case manager, they're going to help you navigate the process a little bit better. You can request the FEMA file. So FEMA will have a file for each application. You'll want to request that if you're going to do a FEMA appeal. And when you send in the appeal, you're going to verify receipt of the appeal. A lot of times those are sent in by fax. So you're going to want to be careful about that. Send everything in as one document. All right, some additional resources for you guys. The Disaster Legal Aid website, the Disaster Legal Services website has a ton of information on it. It has CLEs by people who know everything about FEMA appeals and FEMA law. So if you're going to be doing these cases, definitely encourage you to watch some of those. This was a very broad overview. There are resources out there if you want to do these cases that we can connect you with. That will really drill down on this stuff a lot more than I did or than I'm even able to. FEMA.gov is obviously, you can go there. That's FEMA's website. They've got specific information for each major declared disaster. So if you need the up-to-date information on the Arkansas disaster, it will be on FEMA's website. And then we've got Legal Aid of Arkansas's website there as well, if someone needs to apply for services with legal aid. All right. And with that, we'll take some questions if anyone has it.
Yes. There's several questions right now. There's about 13 questions. So we'll get started.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, this is a pretty interactive audience. I love it. The first question is, if we want to help and win on June 2nd, will we need additional disaster training beyond the CLE?
No, not necessarily. We will have a legal aid attorney there. Like I said, if someone wants additional training, there are all kinds of resources. That's the great thing about federal programs and federal laws, is there are all kinds of resources out there for people. So we're happy to connect people with whatever resources they need.
Fantastic, thank you. And then the second question is there a minimum age for the child, the U.S. citizen child of an undocumented parent to apply for benefits?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And if you're underinsured, are you eligible for FEMA benefits?
You can be eligible so long as the amount of the award that you got and the amount of money you're getting from other services like the SBA don't exceed the maximum amount for whatever program from FEMA you are asking for.
Do you mind hitting the mute button? I think that they said there's a lot of echo. The next question is, failure to pay an insurance proceeds under contract would be a fee-generating case, they state. Can a volunteer sign a contract with the insured to sue the insurance companies on a fee/contingency basis? Bad faith denial on an insurance claim has the potential of a rather large verdict or /settlement.
So I don't know if that would be appropriate for the Disaster Legal Services Program, but if that's something that you have expertise in and want to volunteer your services for the community, then you could certainly do that pro bono if you wanted to. or I guess it wouldn't be pro bono if you're going to get a fee, but you could represent people on those cases and make your services available, definitely.
Can a person who just lost power with no physical damage qualify for the 700 critical needs assistance?
They can certainly apply for it, but they're going to have to show a need. It could be, like I said, food spoiling, for instance, if they don't have any food and don't have any other way to replace it, that may be something they could apply for.
Thank you, Jason. The next one is, do applications need to be to designate specific programs that they're qualifying or applying for, or is the application for all the programs?
So I think it's unmuted now. All right. I think you do have to self-select some of the programs, but you can do that and kind of go through that with the disaster case manager, and that's a big function of why they have disaster case managers, is to walk you through that application process. But you do need to make sure that you tell FEMA about all the various needs that you have, because if you don't tell them about it on the application, they're certainly not going to approve you for that type of assistance, if that makes sense.
It does. How long after the application do inspectors coordinate home inspections?
Really depends on the disaster. Sometimes it can take a few weeks if there are a lot of damaged houses and not a lot of inspectors. But they try to get to it as quickly as they can.
Next question: are there standard forms available for appeals?
There are some sample letters on the Disaster Legal Services website that I showed just a second ago, just right back here. And so, yeah, I would say there are those resources out there if you need help. But once again, appeals are not anything complicated. They are simply a letter to FEMA explaining the basis of the appeal and providing some supporting documentation. So there are appeals we wrote that were literally a couple paragraphs. But yes, there are plenty of samples out there if you want to look at one.
Thank you, Jason. Next question. Are insurance deductibles included in the unmet expenses?
So, yeah, I think they will figure in the deductible when calculating the expenses. Yes.
Perfect. Next question. So they're wondering if they're required to take the loan. It's a requirement. And they're talking about the SBA loan.
No, you're not required to actually accept the loan, but you have to be aware that if you don't accept the loan, it's going to affect your eligibility for some of the other needs assistance programs.
The next question for our in-person audience. What was the name of the local group that meets or plans quarterly about disasters that you mentioned earlier on slide 10?
So it is called the VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Assisting with Disaster. We can pass you along the contact information for the local VOAD. They typically meet once a quarter. They usually meet in person at the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management headquarters. So yeah, very, very cool. And there's a lot of member organizations, including both legal services organizations, are members of the.
Perfect. Next question of our in-person audience. Will FEMA pay for the home insurance deductible?
So FEMA is going to take the deductible into consideration when figuring out if you are eligible for any benefits beyond the insurance settlement.
The next question is the FEMA unemployment benefit separate from a state unemployment benefit claim?
So the FEMA unemployment benefits is a federal program that FEMA puts out there. So yeah, I believe that will be separate.
And the last question, can FEMA help with the individual cost for if a tree falls off, or to remove it for underinsured or uninsured persons, or those who are insured?
So if you have insurance, then FEMA is going to want you to use your insurance. If you make an insurance claim and it's denied, or you don't have the amount that it's approved for, the amount you settle for is less than the amount needed to fix the harm, that is when you may be entitled to a FEMA benefit. So that, whether they'll remove a tree or not, that depends. Like I said, they're trying to make your homes safe and sanitary. So if the tree fell on your house, that may be part of the cleanup process there. If it's just a tree down in your yard, I don't know that they would.
And this is the last question. Thank you so much. Are there any resources for people to complete applications and navigate this process for like case workers?
So there are the disaster case managers well, firstly, there's an online application with FEMA that's at the disaster assistance website, and that will kind of walk the applicant through the process of filling out a FEMA application. There are also disaster case managers in some situations that will help people fill out that initial application. And there's also the disaster legal services program. So if people don't know how to apply, or aren't sure what they should say on their application, that is part of what disaster legal services will do, get people some specific advice on how to apply for FEMA. But if someone wants to make an application, they need to do so soon, because we're already just about halfway through the initial application period. So those applications need to be made here in the next little bit.
Excellent. Well, with that, thank you so much for extending the time of the presentation. We conclude the CLE, and we want to encourage everyone to join the volunteer efforts for the upcoming disaster legal services clinics. You can find more information on the legal services website, in our social media accounts, and there'll be links that were provided on the presentation. And when I send those out before the end of the day, you'll be able to click those or copy and paste them. Thank you so much, Jason, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.